In 2021, a country looked at its people, at their apartments, their phones, their dinner tables set for one, and made a decision that no government in history had ever made before. They appointed a minister, not for defense, not for the economy, not for health or education or infrastructure, a minister of loneliness, because they had run the numbers, they had read the studies, and what they found was this: loneliness was killing their people more reliably, more quietly, and more completely than almost any disease on their health registry. And Japan was not alone in this. Neither are you. We need to talk about what loneliness actually is, because almost everything you believe about it is wrong. Loneliness is not about being alone. Some of the loneliest people on earth are surrounded by other people every single day, in offices, in marriages, in cities of 10 million strangers who never once make eye contact. And some of the least lonely people alive live in remote cabins with no neighbors for miles. Loneliness, as psychologists now define it, is the gap between the social connection you have and the social connection you need. It is a mismatch, not an absence, which means it's possible to be profoundly, medically, dangerously lonely while sitting in a crowded room, which means you may have been lonely for years without having a word for it. Researcher Julian Holt-Lunstad, one of the most cited scientists in this field, published a meta-analysis of 148 studies covering over 300,000 people. Her conclusion stopped the medical community cold. Loneliness increases the risk of early death by 26%. Social isolation increases it by 29%. Living alone increases it by 32%. To put that in language your body, to understand why Japan did what it did, you have to understand what Japan had become. Japan has a word, hikikomori, that has no direct translation in English, because no other language needed it badly enough to invent one. Hikikomori refers to a person who has withdrawn from society entirely, who lives sealed inside their room, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, with no social contact beyond the family member who slides a meal under the door. By the Japanese government's own count, there were over 1 million hikikomori in Japan as of 2019. 1 million people who had decided or been pushed to the conclusion that the world outside their door was not worth engaging with. But hikikomori was only the most visible symptom. Japan also had, and still has, one of the world's highest rates of kotowari, or dying alone. Elderly people discovered in their apartments weeks or months after death, with no one who had noticed them. But here is where this story stops being about Japan, and starts being about you. Because Japan did not invent this problem. It just had the cultural honesty to name it. Across the United States, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy declared loneliness a public health epidemic in 2023, publishing an 81-page advisory that concluded America was in the grip of a loneliness crisis more severe than it had experienced at any point in measurable history. The numbers behind that declaration are worth sitting with. In 1990, the average American had 3 close friends. By 2021, that number had dropped to 1.5. 15% of Americans now report having no close friends at all. So what do you do with all of this? Because this is the moment where a lesser version of this conversation hands you a list. Go to a meetup, join a club, call a friend. And those things are true. And they are also completely insufficient as answers to a civilizational crisis rooted in the architecture of modern life itself. So instead, let's talk about what the science actually points toward. The first thing it points toward is this: the quality of connection matters infinitely more than the quantity. Cacioppo's research and dozens of studies that followed it consistently show that one single relationship of genuine depth and mutual vulnerability does more for your health, your cognition. Japan did something extraordinary in 2021. It looked at the gap between the life it had built and the life its people actually needed, and it admitted at a governmental level that those two things had drifted so far apart that people were dying in the silence between them. That takes a kind of institutional honesty that most societies are not capable of. But there is a smaller version of that honesty available to each of us. The question is not whether you are lonely. The research suggests that if you are a human being living in the modern world, the answer to that question is probably yes, at least some of the time, in at least some of the ways that matter. The question is whether you are willing to name it. Because loneliness carries a shame that almost no other human condition carries.